Welcome back to Expansive and Unscripted. I am excited to be here today with special guest Michele Price, who is doing fascinating work in leadership development, especially empowering women in leadership, and doing work that focuses on generational pattern breaking, kind of weaving what we know about generational trauma and the impact of systems on women and womanhood and identity with what does it mean to develop as a leader, to bring those parts of ourselves forward, out of maybe places that they've been stashed because society told us to keep it down or be less or be more quiet. So I love that so much of the work that you do, Michele, is kind of coaxing those vibrant parts out of the women that you work with so that they can be the whole of themselves and know that that whole of themselves is not too much, but is exactly what the world needs. So welcome, Michele. So excited
Thank
to have you
you.
here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Oh, just thinking about it, I literally was visualizing pulling back layers of, of things that are not oneself and how that literally allows the strengths that have been either dormant or unactivated the opportunity to just be birthed.
Yes. Yes. When I was a kid, I absolutely wanted to be an archaeologist. I definitely was influenced by like archaeology movies of the time. And when I think about this work of kind of peeling off the layers that are not actually our own to find our own true voice and our authentic selves, I often think of, like this maybe like a very intricately carved figurine that an archaeologist might find. And at first, it might just seem like a dull shape that is not very significant. But as the layers of dirt and dust and clay and things are brushed away or washed away or peeled off, it reveals a more and more intricate design of this kind of original, beautiful sculpture or piece of jewelry or piece of artwork. And sometimes that's how I felt in my own journey of like, just kind of trying to slough off centuries of identity that has been imposed on me to find out who is actual me.
Underneath it all, yeah. Another
Hmm.
visual that popped into my mind as I was listening to you, and that's something I really would love to see people have an opportunity to start learning about themselves is visuals and visualization and auditory are so interconnected for me that I literally can see things when people are talking. Kind of
Mm.
like that TV show we saw a long time ago where the person who worked on their team could literally problem solve, kind of like Einstein with
Mm.
an imaginary dashboard in the air.
Yes. Yes. And
And
it's
I
so
was literally,
fascinating.
well, and as I was hearing you talk about, something that's like found a figurine, I was like, yes, because my strength is working within and literally understanding and the mastery of emotions, because I
Hmm.
talked about how important it is for leaders to really understand what is their emotional cadence
Hmm.
and where does it need to be developed in order for them to be better leaders, to be able to communicate in a way that's received as well as taken action with. And so what came to me in my mind as I was listening to you, I was like, make sure you dip that baby in lots of water. Not that it was a baby, but
Yeah.
just in terms, put that figurine in some water and let it wash away some things, because, ooh, you really learn a lot when you learn how to use elements, whether they're physically, intellectually, emotionally, or spiritually. Huh, elements are really where the power is at. So when you understand what's the power of the element of water,
Yeah.
and how can me having a better relationship with water, how can that help me as a person? How can it help me as a leader? How could it help me, as a mother? How could it help me in my business? There's all kinds of ways. That's why when people go, Michele, what does it really mean for us to work with you when you describe how you do things from an indigenous lens? There's one right there. How are you acknowledging and understanding elements? They're huge in our culture. We have such a deep connection to land, and so we hear and experience things completely different. When I hear people talk about, well, I'm just not really sure what to do, a lot of times we've been conditioned and trained to over intellectualize and to overthink. And then we sit there and wonder when people can't be decisive and make decisions. They're
I love.
disconnected from elements. They're disconnected from being able to ground themselves with ease, from being able to hear the wisdom of the land, the wisdom of the water, the wisdom of the air.
That's so powerful. How our relationship with elements and nature creation impacts our relationship to other humans in as we are in roles of leadership. I love that. So
Ourselves.
yes,
People
and
leave out self all the time. They think about relationships with everybody but themselves.
it's
And it's so
true.
funny because one of the things I hear is people will say, well, the people are so selfish. I'm like, they're selfish because they don't understand self. And when you have a deep and profound relationship with self, selfishness never shows up again because it feels
Yes.
heard.
Yes. There's so much abundance in that. Absolutely. Um, as a retired trauma therapist, that was so essential in the work that I did with clients. I would always say, like, the first relationship that we are working on healing is your relationship with self, because trauma, abuse, injustice, oppression destroys the relationship that we have with ourself. That is the first relationship that gets broken, and that's the first relationship that needs healed in order for any other relationship to function healthfully. So I love how you are doing this work of, I mean, essentially like radically decolonizing leadership development, which I think is incredible. And I also wonder if you experience, like, it seems like it's been a long time coming, and also you are way ahead of the curve.
That's the story of my life.
I mean, same. Yeah, like I feel like you are, I don't know, like how do people respond to your work? Because it sounds like ancient and groundbreaking simultaneously, right? It is ancient wisdom, and also groundbreaking for many people who either are not indigenous or have been, their ties to their indigeneity has been severed uh, through various traumatic experiences, or that's just not part of their identity. What is it like for you kind of bringing that into the leadership sphere where that is not often talked about.
What I find is because I've learned how to use questions that allow people to start discovering the answers for themselves, then they're able to embrace it better and differently than if someone just told them what to do, which is hilarious because I'm literally in the middle of producing a podcast series around resistance and the executive dysfunction. But resistance, period, shows up for a lot of people because we've literally forgotten what it's like to allow people to ask more of themselves instead of people inserting themselves and telling them what to do. Now, you and I have watched this happen a lot, for example, on LinkedIn. Watching how people communicate with one another and the types of comments, for example, they'll leave on posts. I literally could write up a synopsis on each person just from one comment that they leave on a LinkedIn post, from how they choose to use their words and how they choose to respond to that post. So many people seem to think that their role and their job, and yes, they've been conditioned to do this, is to tell people what to do. And so I've learned a really great way to disarm that behavior is to use questions.
Mm.
And so, like, when someone has a real projected, well, you know, if you just blah, 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 are you speaking from your personal experience, and how did it feel when that happened to you?
Mm.
And it's
Yes.
so funny because I've had so many people say to me after they've interacted with me, they're like, "Are you a therapist?" I'm like, "No, but I am the family's medicine woman."
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
when you stop and think about how we don't have an anchor for both our identities and our role within inside community like we used to,
Mm-hmm.
knowing who you are is really important because it allows you to start showing up from a place of genuine power for what you contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can start getting people to understand that power is here to serve us, instead of people using power as a control mechanism or an extortion mechanism, then we've accomplished a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it's shifting how, I mean, it's shifting the whole thing from like a vertical hierarchy, right, to a more horizontal relational collaboration.
It's community. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
funny because I've had so many people over the past easy 20 years say to me, "What is community? I don't understand that. Why do you talk about community so much?" And I'm like, that right there ought to be enough to make you start asking a whole nother set of questions.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't understand what community is, then how are you acting within your own? Then we have, so this will be an interesting play on words. Then we have too many chiefs running around and not enough Indians. I get to make that joke. Oh, and this is another reason why most of our tribes were matriarchal, because
Hmm.
there was an understanding that the women who literally birthed the children, that was not the only thing that they were good at creating life with. And so when you have a different anchor for who you are and your role within the community, you're also going to communicate and steward it differently.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
when we hear people talk about how we just need more women in charge, it's not about let's put women in charge because men have been in charge too long, even though there's part of me that can be in agreement with some of those things. It's deeper than that. So allow yourself, if you're listening to Jennifer and me today, allow yourself to start asking yourself a whole different layer of questions.
Mm-hmm.
What is different when women are in charge? What is different when healed women are making the decisions?
Mm.
Because I find so often people stay on that surface, and the surface is where all the unhealed behavior happens. And so they're talking about everything from a perspective of unhealed behavior, and that's why everybody argues so much, because they're literally
Yes.
pulling examples of behavior that is not people at their best. Well, if that's all you're going to use as what we can operate from, then how do you expect to have any different outcomes because you're not doing anything differently?
Yeah. I mean, it's that whole saying, if you always do the same thing, you're always going to get the same results.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and you know how when Einstein, and I forget how he said it exactly, but when he talked about how you can't solve the problem from the same place that the problem originated from, that's literally what he's talking about.
mm,
He's talking about you have to put
mm-hmm.
yourself somewhere different. You have to think and ask and explore from a different place than from where the problem originates. Otherwise, you're using all the same chess pieces.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think about how that, like, how these practices show up in leadership is
Hmm.
when leaders know themselves and are like grounded, have done healing and introspective work, then they know, like, something that comes up for a lot of neurodivergent folks is when they are asking leadership, management, supervisors for questions to gather more context about an assignment that they have, right? And many times unhealed leaders respond in such a way that they feel like their authority is being challenged, that they're being like mocked for not knowing enough about their job, or the employees trying to like one up them, or all kinds of like wildly negative assumptions are being made, where the neurodivergent employee is just like, I just want to do my job well, right? And so I imagine when a leader has gone through a process and is in continual process of like growth and connection with self and knowing themselves, knowing what their tender places are or trigger places, they know to say like, okay, this is not about me, this person wants more information so they can do their work well. That this doesn't automatically mean that I'm insufficient. What are some
Yeah,
other
there's
ways
a
that you
whole lot of assumptions sitting in that, a swirling, literally swirling around them, which is why I chose to name my new podcast Verbal Vortexes. And it talks about the
ooh
journey of the swirling waters of meaning and misunderstanding.
ooh, I love that. That's so powerful.
Yes, because we see it happen all the time. When someone's
Hmm.
asking you a question, are you reacting, because what I heard was not a response. I heard a reaction from a place of ego, felt like their power was challenged. There was full of assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
How on earth did they even get to the position where they're making the decisions and running the company anyway? And
Yeah, it's a
frankly,
little
we
scary.
know, because the word, the playground has been set for, and this is going to make a lot of people unhappy, but until you start facing the power dynamics that we're literally living in, if you aren't facing it and learning how to deconstruct it so that it's equitable for everyone who lives in the world, then you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
We literally have power dynamics that give unearned privilege to white cis males.
Yeah.
That's how they got in leadership. Not because they were smarter, not because they know what they're doing, but because another white cis male gave them the money, hired their company. So money always involved money, power dynamics, and supported them, even
Mm-hmm.
when they could see that they didn't know what they were doing.
Yes. I remember reading a study once that like actually provided data reflecting that men are presumed competent
Yes.
in the promotion realm, and women are made to prove our competence before we can ever move up. And so we have to essentially be doing the job of the next level without the compensation, without the title, for a period of time to be, witnessed as good enough for that role before we are given the chance at those roles. And it is inequitable, um, in, in so many different directions. And you're absolutely right. Like the the colonizer white body supremacy of it all is harmful to all of us, because even those men who are, just kind of pushed along in the current of opportunity and privilege, they are also harmed by this process, because people who are in leadership roles, who are not equipped to be in leadership roles, who don't have the sense of self, are much more at greater risk for so many harmful outcomes, whether it's burnout or stress or broken relationships or substance use, right? Just to cope with all of the things that they are not equipped to hold in that leadership role. So it doesn't serve anybody, even though it appears to externally, like you said, on the surface.
Yeah, because people haven't dissected privilege from leadership. And God, that's a whole full day workshop.
Oh, yes. I hear you. I hear
It's
you.
fascinating. It's fascinating when you start learning to ask yourself different sets of questions. When you give yourself permission to start looking for what are the unique perspectives that I'm missing here, and where am I not challenging my own assumptions when I'm approaching situations or listening to people, and how am I fostering an environment so that it is open communication and collaboration. What have I done lately? Thank you, Janet Jackson. What have I done lately to improve how I communicate and show up? What have I learned about myself that I feel better now that I've leveled up that sliver of my own communication strategies and skills and delivery?
Hmm. Yeah. There's a difference between managing and leading, right? And
Just plain old being honest.
pardon?
Oh boy, that one's really prickly for everybody. I'm shocked how many times people aren't honest with themselves. I have a lot of fun using polls on LinkedIn because it allows everybody to start approaching things for themselves as well as us as a community from a place of let's ask questions. It literally is a foundation for us to kind of do the approach from a question perspective. But it's fascinating to me as I'm watching people like this week. I'm asking questions around perception and core values and so forth, because so often we hear being described a good leader as someone who's extremely self-aware. Yet I find very few people are their self-awareness is not very developed. And so as I'm using these polls and I'm watching how people are answering it, I'm literally going off of how I've watched them behave and interact with me, themselves, other people. And I'm looking at their answers and I'm going, oh, you aren't being honest with yourself. What can we do to help you become more honest with yourself? What kind of question can I ask you that will allow you to open that door for yourself? I'm not trying to do it to embarrass people because people won't change if you approach it from that perspective.
Yeah.
That's a power over situation. That's not how but I so would love people to start asking themselves better questions and giving themselves permission to understand, is that really me? Or is that something I was just told is how we do it? Or is that something that came through my family of our family does blank? Well, okay, so you got punished unless you actually conform to that particular constraint. But is that true for you? And if it's not true for you, then what needs to be released in order for your natural strengths to surface and allow you to start developing yourself from your real strength, not the assumptions that were thrown at you like lots of
Yeah.
mud to see what would stick.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I am someone who loves questions. I love asking them. I love sitting with them. I love being asked questions. And so it's been an interesting journey throughout my life to realize like there are a lot of people who do not like questions, and who don't like, they don't want to rock the boat with any wondering. Let's just go with whatever we've been told. And I think, there's elements of like supremacy culture in don't ask any questions, just do what you're told, right? We experience that in public school systems. We experience that you know, in high control religion, um, in so many different areas of just like, don't question it, just do what you're told. And so I think part of our collective healing requires invitations to be curious, to wonder about things, and for it to be okay to not find an answer ever or right away. One of the things I talk about in like my collective care circles is we don't always solve the problem we bring to the space. There is something so powerful about having witnesses to our questions and having people who can hold those questions with us, whether or not there there exists an answer or we find it. How does this how do I guess like how do you help leaders learn to love questions?
Most of the time for me, it's going to be really different than it would be for anyone else because I've literally been trained since I was a little girl in being the family's medicine woman. So, my approach has almost 60 years of practical implementation behind it.
That's powerful.
And that's something that I think we don't think about a lot. We don't think about, because it's fun for me when people will listen to conversations like this, and then they'll approach me afterwards and they'll go, I heard you talking about, this, that, and the other, and it just all seems like that's a lot of thought and a lot of theory. And as soon as I hear that, one of the first questions I'll ask them is, so what kind of practical things have you solved lately?
Mm.
Because what I'm hearing is they want to understand how to bring it down from the mind into the body, which are where real decisions are made. Real decisions aren't made in the mind. The mind is there to help sort the data,
Mm-hmm.
there to help you identify and sort the data. But your decisions are made in your body. Even the marketing world has been telling people this for years while they argue with it. And so when you stop and you think about who you are as a person and how you show up as a leader, my question to you too, since we're seeing so many interesting health challenges, is what are the things that have been accepted in your family as being, and the word's not coming to me, um, like, our family has diabetes or our family has heart disease. Really? Or has your family passed down assumptions and each person hasn't been given the opportunity to find out who they are?
Mm.
And so therefore their heart literally breaks. Their heart has an attack because their heart doesn't feel heard.
Mm. I just got chills about that.
And that's another reason why last fall, when I started watching the pattern of conversations on LinkedIn, how frustrated everybody was for feeling, not truly being heard. That's why I literally created these listening sessions. I was like, okay, yes, there are a lot of therapists out there who do active listening. They're great at helping people identify specific diagnosis. There's very few healers, practitioners, or medicine women who are teaching us as people, doesn't matter what your role is, who are teaching us how do you bring all the practicality together from being in relationship with the entire cycle of nature, because that's what makes life happen on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak to other planets, but on Earth, it's a cycle of nature. How are you in relationship with that cycle of nature? This is why you hear indigenous people talk about the circle a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when I reference the circle, I'm usually reminding people we are one component of the circle.
Mm-hmm.
Air, earth, water, trees, animals, human. In that circle right now is a big pimple that's about to pop because it has placed itself in a position of being more important than anything else in the circle. And
Mm-hmm.
it's caused a distortion. It's caused problems and challenges that now have such momentum. People are confused. They're like, how do we solve this? Well, first you need to recalibrate yourself. What is your role inside that circle, and where are you being dismissive of everything else that's in that circle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Such powerful. I mean, my brain works similar to yours in that like it is constantly creating little videos and visuals of everything that I hear people talking about. And it's fascinating to me to learn that not all brains do that. There are people who don't think in pictures, and people who um, don't kind of see the story or whatever play out in their mind, which is just all part of
And we're not trying to make you see things in pictures.
right,
We're
right.
not trying
It's
to make you be who we are. But guess what? Where are you trying to make people think like you think? Where are you trying to make people behave the way you behave? And where are you giving yourself permission to just discover, is that really me? Or is that what I was told to do in order to comply? And who gains from my compliance?
mm, chef's kiss. I love those questions, and I think those are perfect questions to kind of leave with our audience as we take the last few minutes to wrap up our conversation. I love a good juicy question that people can sit with, and I would love to know for listeners, like, have you really sat with these questions? Did you journal about them? Did you talk about them? Explore them with anybody, with yourself, with anybody else? Let us know in the comments. Let us know if you if you had the courage to kind of reflect on those questions, because it can be vulnerable and it can be scary, and it can also lead to an extraordinary new level of relationship with self, which is what I hear you saying, Michelle, in your work. So you mentioned a podcast that's coming out. When will that be available for folks to listen to?
They can listen to it now. I just
Oh,
dropped
perfect.
the second episode of that series of 6 this week. So
All
I
right.
am moving a lot of my activities over to Substack. So you can either use my name, Michele Price, in the search function, or you could use verbal vortexes in the search function. You'll find me there. And then, of course,
Okay.
if we're connected on LinkedIn, and if we're not, why aren't we? But if we're connected on LinkedIn, I share it all the time.
Excellent. I'll be sure to include those links in the event information so people can find you easily. So Substack, LinkedIn, Verbal Vortex, love it. Super excited. What is one hope that you have for listeners today? What is one kind of like charge that you want to leave them with?
I'll share with you my vision. When we have 75% deliberately silenced voices at all decision making tables everywhere, we will have peace, prosperity, and a planet that functions the way it's supposed to.
Mm, I love that. Peace, prosperity, and a healthy planet. That's a beautiful vision. May we all contribute to making it so. Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation. It's been such a pleasure getting to know more about your work and the way in which you work, and I'm just excited to see what what you continue creating in the world as a creator and as a healer. So thank you so much, Michelle. Listeners, we'll be back for another episode next week or sometime. Expansive and Unscripted. Thanks for joining us.